Hello, hello. Hello, hello. We're on time, I guess. So basically, uh, uh, it's good to have you. You can see Marta. Uh, let's wait just a little bit longer for anyone else that wants to join. And I know some people actually wanted to participate. So basically, uh, the very first question that goes is everything okay when it comes to audio and visuals and everything. So if you see or hear everything correctly with valid value of sound, volume, and everything, then let me know in the chat window, please. Uh, the settings are the same as we had them yesterday, so basically they should be okay, but I don't really know. So just let me know if everything's okay, please. So yeah, cool. Yeah, I just noticed what you typed, Marta. So uh, basically, uh, okay. So basically, the music is quite quiet because it probably should be quiet. I don't want to meddle too much with this setting because this is basically uh, something that I don't really, I'm not really like knowledgeable about. So again, I'm a streamer noob. So basically, this, I guess that this one should be more informative and what I wanted this to be rather than just a media experience. So I'm not sure who's there and who's listening, but hello, guys. Because the time is actually the expected transmission time, so 6 p.m. Central European time. So I'll just start. So, as you probably know, this is something that I announced some time ago in the group on Facebook that I'm about to do a lecture on something that was made uh, because of the discussions I had in my workplace with my colleagues and other gamers actually. And that discussion was always like whenever the new game just was released or came out, and people were like very emotional about those games. Now and then I would say that, yeah, but I've seen that in that game. No, it's not the very first time that this was actually done. I know something that was better done in the previous games in the past. Basically, a lot of those things happened, and a lot of those discussions took place before. So hence the idea of this whole lecture. So basically, this is a webcast lecture type of thing because I'm a technical guy and I'm like got used to this kind of uh, media learning sharing experience. This is what we do on a very regular basis in my line of work. So basically, I thought that it would be a good way of sharing because typing a lot of stuff and is okay, but basically people don't have time to read what I want to convey, and like uh, probably the picture stands for 1,000 words, as they say. So that's the idea, to actually get the stream online and just try to explain something. So the subject and the topic of this stream is basically why those games, why would I even say something like that, that something was better before uh, than it is today. So because this sounds fishy, this is like a sentimentalist approach to the subject. So whenever you ask an oldie to say something about the old times, he would always or she would always tell you that it was better. They would always tell you that it was better. But this is not the case actually. So basically, yeah. Let's start with the intro. So where it begins. So basically, nickname Northon. I'm a gamer. I've been playing games, not only adventures, but stuff other than adventure gaming for more than 30 years now. Reaching 40 years old this year. So like I started adventure gaming when I was like 10 years old, or around 10 years old. I started playing computer games way before, so like 3 years probably prior to my first adventure game. So I kinda remember those things. Another thing is that in this lecture, every game that I'm going to present in this one, I actually played and completed, except for one. I know about one game in this lecture, which is very, very interesting one, that I have never touched because I hadn't any opportunity to get this in any legal matter, and I prefer legal ways. Basically, that's the only way to do. Piracy is bad. So basically, that's why I haven't touched it yet, but I'm waiting for it to be released somewhere to get it. I'll get to that and I'll tell you which one is it and why it's so special, that even though I haven't played it, I decided to be in this lecture. Another thing is that some disclaimers. So I'll be showing some game screenshots, some of them of disturbing nature, but not that very disturbing. So there is going to be some violence, some discussable content, basically, but nothing really extreme. So this like Twitch or forbids sharing such content. So don't be afraid. But those games are constantly and we're touching some sensitive subjects, so discretion is advised, so to speak. Another thing is that basically I'll encourage everyone to play those games by themselves. This is not something that I want to like spoil fun for you. This will have 2020 and basically a new age of new game development and eras and new games coming, and like game dev reaching or overreaching many stages unseen before. But still, those games that I'm going to present, some of them are actually better, in my opinion, than those that are coming. So they're not technically better sometimes, but they have something that those today games don't have anymore, or like have, but in some small degree, to some small degree. Another thing is that, as you know, English is my secondary language, so basically forgive me for any language goofs, quirks, and everything like that, because I'll have those sometimes, especially when I'm like talking freely. So like again, thinking in Polish and speaking in English. So this is something that you need to be aware of. So again, let's get to the thing. Disclaimers. One more thing. Music in the background is from those games. So all rights go to the owners. Basically, this is like I would share gameplay, so you would hear it naturally. So basically, I can tell you and refer those games or OSTs especially to you if you want to. But basically, this is from the games, basically. So, but before we get there, we need to get through some history, because we need to set a context before we are going to talk about why it's so important and why it's so why it was better. So to get that context, we need to set up the stage with some terms like what is an adventure games, and what are those things, why are they different from other genres, and so on. So first of all, as you probably are aware, is the fact is that adventure games are choice-driven games. So basically, whether it's player choice of using an item, travel option, a dialogue option, or anything else, basically, those are always choice-driven. So basically, that means that Uh, this could also apply to other game genres as well, but what you get and what you can always expect is that you will be given a story, in which story you will be choosing the next stages of that story based on some choices. And those, so in comparison to action games, this is not about reflex. This demands intellectual and mental prowess, so to speak. So basically, this requires thinking and problem solving and quick choices and quick decision making. So sometimes you get some a combination of a quick mental or intellectual choice combined with fast reflexes. This happens too. Again, I mentioned before that there is a certain thing that I don't agree with, which is basically a term beating a game or completing a game. So in this particular genre, it's very difficult to tell how does one beat the game. So the story itself was always a reward for beating the game. So like what does it mean to beat the game? Does it mean that you see the end subtitles or credit list? Does it mean that you've seen the last cutscene? What does it mean? So basically, this is on player, and the player choice and the player assessment of the game makes the difference and makes the reward, basically. So I use this silly example that if first-person shooters are a fighter in AD&D terms, and platformer require dexterity, rogue thief, then adventure games are wizards. So basically, this is the skill set required from a player, so to speak, to approach those games. Okay, this is also a nerd genre. So basically, references to pop culture, to the nerd franchises, RPG franchises, an expected level of some literary culture and pop culture. So basically, those games want people to know things before they sit down and try playing those games. And this is different from other types of games when they actually are to be relaxing and when you sit down and just want to forget about everything and just play with your reflexes. No, in this genre, you need to think, you need to be open, you need to be open for some tiredness that will happen to you, some weariness that will affect you, and some post-processing after you complete the game, or some really emotional fragment of the game. This genre is not elitist. Whatever the adventure gamers will tell you, like those games are so better because we're wizards and you're fighters. This is not an elitist genre. So basically, the subjects touched in adventure games, of course, they need people to think before they actually sit down to do these games, but they are not elitist. They are really open. There are adventure games for everyone with every level of mental or emotional prowess. So don't think ever about those as an elitist genre. Another thing. Hey, Melina. Glad that you joined. So, like, I already started, so I'm not sure how far you've gone. So basically, I'll then continue. So I'm looking at the chat from time to time, and then I'll be addressing what you say. So just hello. Basically, again, associated with a specific control scheme. So point and click, you know the term, everybody is accustomed with the term, and that means that navigation is basically based on pointing and clicking, which is like literally what happens there, or proximity hotspot detection, which is something that it's often a scene of many games, and I'm like guilty of this as well. I couldn't help but to use the same thing in my game. So basically, that means that you go towards an object or an element on the scene, and then when the player is near or the character is near that object, the context of interaction changes. So, for example, when you go towards the mirror, for example, you can see your reflection in the mirror, and this is context-based. And again, the very important factor is an amount of time needed to beat the game. Which what beating the game again? It's really hard to tell what does it even mean. So let's assume that beating the game is seeing the credits sequence. So reasonable amount of time is around average 8 hours, but it's 8 to 16 hours really, depending on the game. So basically this is like the context. So let me go through. I'm trying to get through this very quickly, but this is really needed in my opinion. So the early 80s, I need to start from there because those scenes, made scenes, so to speak, made by those guys back in the early 80s are still there till today. So 40 years of history of actually legacy decisions that affect games till today. So basically, adventure gaming is based on those old 80s text-driven games, which are very similar to paragraph games. And paragraph games were based on books, basically. So some publisher would issue a book with some paragraphs and section marked like S1, S2, or S3, and so on. And basically, when a reader would read a chapter, then there would be a section saying, then if your decision is like to watch your reflection in the mirror, go S2. And if your decision is not to watch yourself in the mirror, then go S3. So basically, those first games in the text era, the age of typing, as I named those this era, was basically about picking some paragraphs. But those game devs created a very smart way of doing those paragraphs. So instead of just typing S1, S2, they would introduce verbs and nouns. So basically, player interaction would be based on typing some verbs and addressing some nouns with those verbs. So basically, a combination and vocabulary of the game would allow a player to actually explore the world story in a read content by reading the content. Notable titles of the era, and I want to tell you folks that this lecture, this webcast, is also about sharing the titles. So if you find something interesting, then just write it down, because this might be a game for you. If you don't know this already, because I know that you folks played a lot of games in your life, so probably I'll be speaking about some content that you already know. So basically, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, based on Douglas Adams's brilliant book, is something amazing. And basically, even though it was created in '84, so basically there are people listening to me now that were born in 1984. I know about that. So basically, this game is I'm looking at the chat now. Basically, exactly. So basically, this is something that again, another one is The Hobbit, but this is something in the next slide. So basically, there's this thing about the game dev and those games that you mentioned, which is that game devs actually needed to write those games the way that they could cover everything, so every possible situation, and people actually are not thinking the same way like game devs do, like players don't think the same way. So this is something, and it also corresponds to this one. So the paradigms of the era were completely different. So let me just cover this one. I'll just refer to that verb noun thing. So arcade games are the thing. So if you haven't been born in the 80s, then you probably know this from the Netflix shows and like the Stranger Things, for example, when this is like highlighted. Games are for children. This is something that was always shown. Like if you see the US commercials from the era about video games, those were always about kids playing games. It was never something else. No UIs. Basically, arcades had graphics. They started to use some extended graphics, pixel-based, but those more mature games, like adventures, they would use still text interface. And those verbs and nouns. So basically, you can see some really weird division there. Then you have games with graphics, an easy interface and like a lot of happening in those games. Basically, to the left on the description, on the screenshot, you've got Pitfall. To the right, you've got Zorro. Both were from 8-bit era computers. So there's graphics, interactivity that would be later used in the adventure games, but still the real adventure games of the era were text-based, based on those verbs and nouns. So one thing that I need to add there is the game to the right, which is Zorro, had some adventure-like elements. And those adventure-like elements are, if you can see the screen, there is an bull to the right, there is a horseshoe, and there are those X and Y marking rods for animals, like a nasty thing to do, but basically that's the historical way of branding animals. So branding rods, Zorro needed to use the hitter, jump on this thing, basically this is a process of jumping, and hit one of the marking things. That's the lying black thing on this brick construction with the Z letter, Z standing for Zorro, and he needed to brand the ox. So you can see this item interaction. So there were some elements there that will be used later on, but not very often. So this game was basically epic and legendary because of this. So basically, when the graphics were added with computer generating CGI standing for computer generated imagery, which is weird these days because this is too generic. When they started adding graphics, they basically still used this verb noun interface. So as you can see on the picture here in the King's Quest 1, you would bag troll. This is something basically that Melina mentioned. And there's something about those games that make them very, very difficult. Which is the idea of thinking exactly what developers had in their mind. And this is basically a sin of many, many devs, myself included, to this very day. So there was a selfish thinking that if developers were able to think about something, then everybody else should go the same way. But that very idea introduces the situation when people were very annoyed after buying a game. And they would, for example, phone, exactly. So basically, you needed to call the US call center basically, and ask what's the solution to the puzzle, because this is something which is a blocker for your game. And the first answers that I have seen in those magazines of the era was basically about, but those games are made for you to spend 1 year with them. So you need to understand that these games weren't released so often. They were released for 1 year of your constant annoying struggle with the game. So the assumption was that eventually you'll get there, you'll understand, because you would like type the whole possible vocabulary in the game with all possible combination of verbs and nouns, and then finally the reward for you as a player would be find this particular verb and noun. For example, bag troll. I wouldn't think about bagging troll in this particular picture. I would probably fight troll or something like that. Basically happy mistakes. Bob Ross, right? So basically, that's another thing that I wanted you to notice on this picture is that this is Sierra Online, so basically a titan among adventure game developers, legendary company. They introduced something which was taken from the arcade games, which is scoring. Basically, they thought about the concept of beating the game, and you've got 1 year to actually beat the game, and they thought that if they shown player what is the biggest possible score of the game, then the player would have an immediate feedback after the completing the game and seeing the credit sequence. If the score was 114 of 158, that would tell a player that actually they missed something and they need to replay the game. This was the era of like experimentation. What does it mean to basically play the story-based game? So basically, again, this is what Marina mentioned, that age of typing. The storyteller's challenge was basically that they needed to think about those verbs and nouns that were not exactly entered the way that what the developer actually had in mind. There was some unwanted mood logic. Mood logic is stands for a situation when that situation is so complex or so silly or goofy that no sane person would actually found it like by even trial and error. You'll never like find out what's the solution. One of my examples, the worst possible examples, is not from the 90s game era. It's from 2000s adventure game, when a player, to get into a building, needed to glue with basically glue tape or something, so duct tape or something like that, a cell phone to a cat. So no sane person would ever think about putting a cell phone with the duct tape around the cat. And this is moon logic, basically. And everybody, basically, every developer I know, every game I've seen is probably guilty of moon logic from time to time. But if it's not very annoying moon logic, and if you can find solution for it very quickly, it's not a problem. So, again, age of experimentation. So, unwinnable situations. This is basically a problem. With so many concepts and with so many paths to take, there was always a possibility then you can be stuck in a game and you don't know that the game is already over. And it was over 3 hours ago when you did it. Did something that you shouldn't. Again, King's Quest is the best example here. King's Quest 5, for example, but we'll get there. So let me just tell you that developers would place things in their games that would very annoy you at times. And that is that they would do something quick or some dialogue option that would actually choosing this particular option would end your game, but the game wouldn't tell you that the game is already over. So in King's Quest V, eating a sandwich from your inventory is a game over. You can do this, the game would tell you that you've just eaten a sandwich and that was tasty, but the game is over. Because you need that sandwich later on. And the game doesn't tell you, but this is like, we'll get there. The devs started to introduce branching storylines. It's a result of introduction of player choices and usage of verbs. Themes of the game started to become more varied. So basically, the mature people are playing games. There's an expected level of pop culture knowledge and so on about those games. So instead of just goofing out with Adams's or Tolkien's worlds, they would offer more witty entertainment, more mature stuff, and so on. So when they started to started serving stuff, we'll get there. Quest for Glory will definitely get there. So basically, when they started serving stuff, people started having opinions and started thinking about those games and started having needs. So audience expectations grew higher. And because of these expectations, that audience needs to be literate, those games are branded for adults. And that's a moment when the silly games for children started to be made also for adults, with adults only in mind. So this is like the shift, and this is the distinction that happened before. So they started to use graphics, and as I said, and those games started to become more adult. So themes of sexuality and murder start to appear. We've got Larry Laffer, which is your sweet Larry, an ugly guy that goes from bar to bar and trying to pick up girls. And then we have Laura Bow. By the way, the left one was imagined by one of the Sierra's employees, Al Lowe. He's the guy that he actually thought about making something for really, really mature people, which was revolutionary at the time. And basically, Roberta Williams from Sierra's and her husband Ken's idea was to make something in Agatha Christie style. So they started introducing murder and sex in games. I don't need to explain you that this is like going towards a specific audience and specific type of content. So they started introducing those archetypes. So basically, they had a game, and what I didn't tell you before, and which is really important, that in those text adventure games, there was no external protagonist. When the player started the game assumed that the player is a character in the game. So there was this no immersion, or one would argue that this is a total immersion, because you know some John Doe or Jane Doe, you're you, and you're playing that game as you. And then in this age, they shifted towards externalization. The graphics was added. So because the graphics was added, you could see your protagonist, you could see their interactions with the world. So what that meant is that the first character knowledge appeared in games, in adventure games. So to the story content, you needed to add the also content about externalization, about your needs as a character, not only as a player. So that means role playing, basically. And you started role playing with your protagonist, so that made the story more immersive and more digestible, so to speak. So basically, the true immersion starts here because of this introduction. So those archetypes were really simple at first, taken from the existing media. They wouldn't create something else. So Larry Laffer, as I said, Gigolo, Laura Bow, so Agatha Christie style detective, King Graham from King's Quest, Just a Wandering King, as taken from those folk tales and so on. Light mood for teenagers and young adults was introduced. So those iconic archetypes are really simple, of the at least of this era. So the assumption was the player needs to immediately feel themselves in the shoes of this character, and that worked basically. But then the revolution happened, and the revolution was based on the publicity being ready for something more than a just verb noun editor. The publicity wanted amazement, they wanted excitation, they wanted the surprise as factor that we know so good from today's world. So nothing really changes in history, right? The publicity wanted more great graphics because they were accustomed with what happened with those arcade games, and they were constantly thinking about how can we take those graphics from arcade games and put those into adventures. So, and the computers became more powerful, so 16-bit era started. So the devs immediately answered with this. So Lucasfilm Games, George Lucas's company basically, which was renamed LucasArts later on, started doing experimentation with those graphic engines that also Sierra had did before, and they added something that would change the history of adventure games forever, which was called Script Creator System for Maniac Mansion, for the game Maniac Mansion from 1987. And as you can see, this SCAM system is basically a pre-selectable interface of nouns, and verbs, and nouns being on the scene. So basically, a player would use and combine those commands from a limited amount of verbs and nouns. So that made two things possible. First of all, the amount of things that player had to think or be in developer's head was limited to something more bearable, and each made players focus on the scene, on the graphical content, rather than thinking about words. So we're shifting towards movie-like reception. So, and it's not an it's not an accident that the Lucas's company actually started doing this. So they created two games. Maniac Mansion was very important, and Zack McCracken was the second one. I am going to tell you why. Because they introduce multiple switchable protagonists. Today games sometimes still focus one protagonist because they as they say, they want the immersion to happen. They want to say they want to make player feel only one character, because probably more than one would be too overwhelming. Yes, that's true. But we always think, when we like a game, for example, we tend to think that it would be cool to have more games in the same franchise, so to speak. So they were thinking about this back then, and they introduced multiple characters in one adventure game. Every character had their own story, way of resolving problems, and so on. So basically that meant that the immersion was like pulled back from the player, and instead more story content was introduced. So in every game, when we're not ourselves, when we don't create our own character, oh yes, that's definitely, Melina, this is basically that's the topic for another discussion. I love Dead League Entertainment. That should explain you what I think about this for now. So basically, and the Book of Unwritten Tales, I still have to play the second part, but I had played all befores, including the Chronicles. So basically, we'll talk about those definitely later on, but not in this one. So basically, abstractions, silly puzzles, that you mentioned, this Unwritten Tales. Yeah, Unwritten Tales basically has switchable characters. So this is basically something that they took from the era, but they never covered this fact that they actually they are inspired by those games from the past. So this is like immediately you can see things, but they also expect a player to know actually pop culture a lot. Basically, in the first Unwritten Tales games, there is a lot of World of Warcraft references and so on. So this is like, again, a proof of this nerdy content. It stays there for 40 years now in those games. So again, a lot of abstraction. So Lucasfilm Games started introducing abstraction and silly puzzles to those games. Clever solutions, unthought, like things that weren't thought before by anybody. There is an infamous puzzle in Maniac Mansion about placing hamster in a microwave. In today's gaming world, completely unacceptable. But before, the game allowed people to do this, basically. And because it was so hilarious for people, it still is, kind of. Yes. They were introducing a lot of things like that later on. We'll be talking about this in that's a, like, probably understandable reaction, but they understood at one stage that basically this is too harsh, and they needed to do something more sophisticated, funny instead of horrifying, and they would do that in Monkey Island. Let me get there. So movie moguls started financing this stuff, so Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, and then because the 60-bit era started, so 60 plus 60-bit color palettes started to be used. Games became more and more beautiful, basically. So what you see now on the screen was absolutely 10 out of 10 back in the day, because people were not ready for an adventure games with this kind of sophistication, with this kind of graphics. This was amazing at the time. And that meant that game dev artists and musicians finally started to become recognized. Their names would pop up here and there. They could find employment finally in the game dev industry based on what they did in game dev. So this started also an era of game dev itself. Before it was just a computer programming for entertainment. Now we've got true game dev. So basically this is important. This era introduced also the piracy, and the piracy of the era was so annoying for those small companies that they introduced something called copy protection. So younger people don't know this probably, if there are any during this stream, but the games would have added those things in the code and in the box. So to the left you got this cartoon like circle, which was in a box of game called Cruise for a Corpse. And before you could actually play the game, you needed to scroll this box, kind of like a Mayan calendar, find a specific picture that was displayed on the screen, and find the corresponding letter and type down this letter before actually game allowed you to play it. So basically, copy protection is a big thing, especially for adventure games. So this was in probably every adventure game that I have ever played from the era. There was something like this. A red glasses thing. Okay, so I need to tell you about this because this is funny. Some games would have packaged the red glasses, kind of like 3D glasses, that you needed to, or red glass basically, that you needed to like put on some specific page in the manual of the game, and then only then this part of the page covered with this red glass could tell you a secret code to enter the game. So basically a lot of annoying things. So scene of cracking games and crackers started also back then by altering the code of the game. So basically this is probably subject for another things. Another context that I need to set is actually the tools of the revolution, which is Deluxe point, digitalization. Floppy disks are the medium of the era. Which would make adventure games come with really huge numbers of floppy disks sometimes. And Phillies is emerged with the game. So basically you'd get yeah. Yes, that's a good point. In Larry Laffer 7, which was about the cruise ship and love, they would give you this square thing, and this was, as Marina says, whenever you enter the room in a game, for example, a kitchen, a small square to the right of the screen, much like my picture now during this stream, would appear in game with a color and a number. And for example, imagine that there is a cyan 7. And that would mean that you need to take this thing from the box, this cardboard something, and smell the cyan 7. Because the smell on this, like embedded in the 7, would correspond to the smell of this. Yeah, Cyber Sniff 2000. Yeah, but feelies were added, so basically t-shirts, stuff like that, so merch in the games. This is probably also a subject for another discussion, but I needed to tell you that the game dev started to have names, the names that would echo through the industry till the very day. Today. Names like Amy Hennig, known for Legacy of Kain, that's the lady to the top right, in the top right corner. Ron Gilbert, Gary Winnick, Tim Schafer, Dave Grossman, Brian Moriarty, Ken and Roberta Williams, Jane Jensen. Basically, these people were creating some amazing games over the years. Some of them are still in the business. Like definitely, I know that Brian Moriarty was doing something in the business based on Game Developers Conference from 2 years ago. I know that Tim Schafer, Ron Gilbert, and Amy Hennig are still in the business. Amy Hennig is basically responsible for the Uncharted game and its storyline. Jane Jensen's probably writing books these days. case, she's responsible for the plot lines for some of Sierra games. Amazing plot lines, basically. So these people started to be the names, the brand. So basically, Sierra would, in the 90s, Sierra would say, this is a Roberta Williams game. And basically everybody's expectations just were rising accordingly. And of course money spent. Another fun fact is that those game dev industries were placed in some cool places. So Sierra's Oakhurst was just a nice Sierra mountain, like this red building. But Skywalker Ranch, this one is famous. Basically George Lucas's ranch with those amazing elevators with some insanely expensive wood inside and so on. And basically the biggest titles from the Lucasfilm games were actually developed in this building and the buildings surrounding this on this ranch. So the developers would live there for years and then just code games. That's the actual when you're a creator, like drawing pictures or whatever. That's the way you always want to do this. You want to like have solitudes in some magnificent place with some scenic view and just do your job, right? So that's something that they actually did. Basically, if you will ever be to States after this whole thing with the current disease ends, you can visit the Lucas's Skywalker Ranch. There is some admission. I don't know what are the regulations, but I know that the press was visiting it. I know that there is an impressive collection of Star Wars things in there from movies and blasters and so on. So basically, this probably, if it's still a tourist attraction, probably is worth adding to your list. So the summary. They used a graphical presentation of a kid's arcade games and shifted it to the mature storytelling. It used the well-known setup from the Hitchhikers and Hobbits and started introducing new stories on the way. Introduced interactivity known from the paragraph games on the larger scale, and used graphics and sound as an equally important part of the storytelling. So they shifted the stage, basically set up the stage for something, and started telling more and more mature stories. And then the Lucas, something it's not right with the slide, but doesn't matter. So in January 1990s, the Lucasfilm Games released their amazing game called Loom. It doesn't look like that, but this is a post-apocalyptic game. Interface was really simple. As you can see, there's a distaff and the musical notes on the screen. So basically, that's how you interact with the world. You either click something on the screen or you need to play a note against some context. So in here, you play a music against a hole in a tree. Yes, that's true. That's how it worked. And basically, this is absolutely, I can't even express how brilliant that game was, especially that this was a huge step from this Maniac Mansion graphics and Zach McCracken graphics. The graphics were absolutely amazing, as you can see on the left and the right pictures, because you have a gradient scale. There was parallax scrolling introduced in this game. So absolutely marvelous artistic and music work, because this, what's covered on this slide mistakenly, is the fact that Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake is used, and themes from Swan Lake are used throughout the game. And of course, Quest is musical. I don't want to spoil this game for you because this is still worth playing. I just need to tell you one thing, that this interface of this stuff was really clever, and the logic needed from a player was really clever, because, for example, there was a spell, because Bobby and Threadbare, protagonist of this game, is a weaver. So he weaves things like cloths and something. So weavers are some magical people with a post-apocalyptic world where whatever was left from the world are little tiny islands, and each island hosts a guild. So there's a guild of weavers, guild of glassworkers, a guild of smiths, and so on. And weavers are basically, as I said, wizards. So they use music. No, I have no idea what's the biggest lore or the lore behind it. I can tell you there is a lore, but this is so complex and left to your imagination, so to speak, that I won't delve on this. Yeah. Yeah. So basically, this is something that made you, for example, there was a pile of hay left on the ground, and there was a spell which were 3 notes, for example, D, E, G, that you needed to play to turn this hay into gold. Because that was a spell, turn things into gold. But there was a situation in the game when there was a pile of gold that you needed to turn into hay. So what would you do? You needed to play those notes backwards. So as a player, you would have your pen and paper all the time, and you'd write things that you learned by interacting with the world. So you would learn new notes and music sequences, because the world would play songs for you. So if you've seen some green tapestry in one of the places, the tapestry could tell you how to play the song that would color things green. And if you wanted to color things white, you wanted just to reverse the music. If you wanted to green to turn into white, basically, which is really important thing. So this is the mechanics. I strongly advise you. There are 2 versions of this game. The version to the left is the older one, the classic one, and there was the newer graphic introduced later on, which you can see to the right. People that played the original say that the original is better. I think so. So the graphics is nicer in the later version, but the gameplay and some choices are better in the previous one. So let's do. Next, like I said, next scenes are also from the Loom, from this version, so you can see the mood scenics, the part of the plot, probably a little bit of a spoiler there. But basically, what I need to tell you about this game, one more thing, is that there was some animations made in that game that people in 1990 were thinking that this is impossible to make. So basically, Barayan Moriarty and those people that created that game did some animation in some like insanely small amount of time. With a rotating head. I don't want to like go deeper into details. I don't know if I have anything else there on this, but animations were so amazing that people would give this game 10 out of 10 everything everywhere, because they were saying that music is amazing, graphics is amazing, and there had some amazing animations. So you can compare this to the real life graphics of today, like I don't know, in the upcoming Cyberpunk games or whatnot. So this is the same effect. Yeah, then a story of my life, as I said in this picture. So in 1991, basically, I would wait for my parents to go to they wanted to take me to a circus. And they were preparing, they needed to do something, and I somehow I acquired the Secret of Monkey Island. And I started playing that game. And I remember that I was like a 10 or 11 years old kid. I didn't want to go to the circus with them anymore after starting this game, because I run the game, some amazing music started like playing, and there then comes this protagonist on the screen and says, "My name is Guybrush Threepwood and I wanted to be a pirate," and that just killed me. So basically, I was glued to the screen, and the problem is that this game is so abstract that I was completely confused. So the level of confusion I had was equal to the level of my amazement and being glued to the screen. So this is a kind of thing that we expect from the games today. We say that the games need to be simple. We say often that, yeah, the control scheme is so silly that I don't want to play this game. Oh no, 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 this UI element should be a little smaller or something. But the fact is that we want to be confused by a game, but in a good way. So basically, we need that time to learn the game. We don't need the game to tell us how to play it, if the learning how to play the game is a part of the game, really. So this today's game are just mass produced, massively produced, and to the very large scale, and you have this simple way of doing things. So you've got these mini maps, simple interfaces, because you need to do this as quickly as possible. Go, proceed with the story, do stuff without any hesitation, without any obstacles, and so on. But if learning the game was a part of a story, as some games still do, today. So basically, when, for example, they introduce a UI element that you need to play the game as a part of the game. For example, I don't want to be very Polonocentric, so to speak, but The Witcher does this in a good way. So if you play The Witcher 3, you've got the introduction in Kaer Morhen where Geralt learns fighting and learns some steps as a part of the game. And that's something that you do like as a player, often. And this game actually was like that. So it taught me things that I needed to learn, basically, to actually progress the story. One more thing. Yeah, I haven't been speaking English at the time. My parents wanted to teach me, like they would send me to lessons and something, or something, but I was hesitating a lot, and I would even escape or skip those lessons. But this game made me sit through the whole holiday with a vocabulary or dictionary on my lap, and just, my name is Guybrush Threepwood. What does it mean? Yeah, I understood. I want to be a pirate. This I somehow understood, but then. Day of the yeah. That's good. So Scam engine becomes a standard. As you can see to the left, give, pick up, use, open, look at, push, close, talk to, and pull. You've got those. You've got items. What's the most important of this is that this game introduces hilarious puzzles with a huge level of abstraction and moon logic, as I said in this slide. So there is a case which is called use monkey wrench. So if you're an English native speaker, then you know that monkey wrench is this tool to do some hydraulic job. But the problem is that I wasn't a native, and I'm not a native English speaker. So for me, this was an extremely difficult thing to figure out, because like basically I needed to understand that there is like a connection of sorts between monkey and monkey wrench. I think that this would be easier for a native English speaker, but monkey wrench in this particular example is not a monkey wrench. It's basically using a monkey on hydraulic utensil. Yeah, you would use a monkey actually to unscrew something. So basically, this is a level of abstraction this game introduces. The plotline becomes movie-like. The screen says, like, on the cover and everything says for itself that you have like close-ups, face close-ups, movie-like discussions, conversations, and so on. And of course, the protagonist is legendary babyface pirate against his nemesis, the zombie pirate LeChuck, right? This was a comedy, a love story, and a pirate adventure together. We all love pirates, so if you haven't played this one, if you love good comedy and some really abstract stuff, then it's a game for you. So I need to talk about those puzzles a little bit more, because this kind of set a milestone and a standard for those games. So to get money, for example, in this game, you need to acquire a helmet and participate as a living cannonball in the nearby circus. But the problem is that you can't find any helmet anywhere. But if you think that the pot taken from one of the kitchens is good enough, then it's like the way to go. Then, for example, that's a game when you have a rubber chicken with a pulley in the middle. Yeah, the very first I picked up this rubber chicken with a pulley in the middle, I was, what the hell is that? And basically, everything is explained when you use a rubber chicken on one of the cables between the islands to actually slide to the other side on this rubber chicken. To open the safe, this was extremely hard. One needs to convince the shopkeeper to go to speak to a local sword master on an errand, and when the shopkeeper wants to take something from his safe to the sword master, he would open the safe with a specific combination, and the combination was randomized with every game. So it wasn't like always the same. So player had to for multiple of attempts and with multiple of tasks and tries and errors to memorize the correct sequence of opening safe and to write it down somehow or draw it down, and then try the pull-push mechanics from the scam engine on the handle. Poisoning the deadly piranha poodles with using yellow petals from the nearby forest and mixing those petals with the meat. And then I remember that I was shocked when I used this toxic meat on piranha poodles. Piranha poodles, by the way. Yeah, extremely dangerous. So basically, but then I was shocked that I killed some small dogs. And then the pop-up would appear and it said, the poodles are okay, they're just asleep. Okay, that was a relief, basically. So, and Guybrush, again, a new type of hero appears, because Guybrush has only one skill. Of course, he's charming and funny, and basically, but he can hold breath underwater for 20 minutes. And believe me, this skill is explored in this game. It really comes in handy. So, basically, I can express how many things in this game are so epic, and I can find some of those in new games. By the way, in the game that Melina mentioned before from Deadly Entertainment, so Deponia, they actually followed that rule and they did it pretty well. So basically, but things like dialogue-based, goofy puzzles. So this is a legendary insult sword fighting. So the sword fighting in this game is based on picking a specific insults. So it would shaken your opponent when you say something that he couldn't expect, or is so witty repartee, like this is something that is unbearable for your opponent, so to speak. So of course, player needed to explore the game and needed to lose a sequence or a number of times to actually learn those insults to be able to use them later. So I wanted to show you some of those. So, for example, the enemies would say, "My wisest enemies run away at the first sight of me," and you would answer even before they smell your breath, and then it would make your opponent shaken. Or, "You make me want to puke. You make me think somebody already did." Or, "You fight like a dairy farmer." How appropriate. You fight like a cow. So basically, that's the fencing in this game, and basically. It kind of still hilarious for me till this very day, but not as much as what happened in the third game of the cycle. It's a little too small probably for you, but I'll read some. In the third game of this series, the insult sword fighting returns, but with one thing added: the repartees have to rhyme, because that's the rule of fighting on the sea. So you have a really epic and funny sword fights, like your opponent saying, "Coming face to face with me must leave you petrified," and you would answer, "Never before have I seen someone so sillified." Or, "Is that your face? I thought it was your backside." Or killing you would be justifiable homicide. When I'm done, your body will be rotted and putrefied. And that make it really like too serious basically, so absolutely hilarious, so to speak, and that's something that you need to explore for yourself. Um, yeah, I'll send it to you then. In part 4, there is a new, like as you can see, the evolution of these games. It became 3D. Uh, there's an Australian, the purple guy on the screen, that actually is a problem for all the pirates on the in the Three Island area, because this guy knows how to beat all the pirates in every insult game. Insult darts, insult dancing, insult drinking. There is a lot of insult games, and every pirate is being beaten by this Aussie mandrill person. So basically, this insult thing is, again, as you can see, from game to game, it's basically being reused, referred, upgraded. This is amazing. Basically, please notice also he's Australian, so you've got a kangaroo with boxer gloves, and I think that's a platypus skin. So basically, yeah. So very direct. So again, part 2, things that I need to tell you is that those games are available on Steam and GOG, I think, GOG. So to the left one, you've got the old screen from the Monkey Island 2, and the second one to the right is a remake. And in those new versions, you can switch between the old overlay or new overlay, so you can play remade game or the old one in the same game, with commentary from developers, which is really interesting. The cars, so I mentioned the third game, so it's gorgeous, it has amazing music, it has a lot of hilarious jokes. This adventure is probably one of the best adventure games I have ever played. So, and I just want to, I've marked also at this Papa Pichu on the screen. So basically this is also a summary of jokes in Monkey Island. So there is a bush in this game, the very spiky, thorny bush. And when if Guybrush learns, because that's optional, if Guybrush learns that the name of this bush, which is basically Papa Pichu, means ouch, then Guybrush never would ever again say ouch in this game. Every time, instead of ouch, he would say Papa Pichu. So basically this is the thing. So I played both ways, so I had both ouch and Papa Pichu versions, and after having the Papa Pichu for some time, I was like doing only the Papa Pichu playthrough. Oh, Papa Pichu. So basically that's it. Part 4, again, this is also a 90s game, but this went 3D. They introduced some arcade elements. 3D in the 90s is awful. So basically, all games that were ported to 3D, because it was a new medium and a new way of thinking and a new way of revolutionary, because everything today is 2D really. I mean 3D. So, but the very first stage was really complex. Still, fourth part of Monkey Island looks quite good. Characters are recognizable, but this part is definitely the worst from all the Monkey Island 90s games, but it's still good. Basically, if you're a fan of the saga, then it's you cannot miss that one either. So, Deluxe's second best game is the game that was streaming yesterday, basically, as a demo, which is Indiana Jones 4. So, they first created Indiana Jones The Last Crusade, but it was movie-based and some things were added. But basically what they also did is they created a script for the fourth movie, and that script, they didn't want to use it for the movie, so this script was sold to the Lucasfilm Games, and instead of a movie, the game was created. And the game is about Atlantis, so it's called Indiana Jones 4, The Fate of Atlantis. It has a marvelous atmosphere, a lot of hilarious puzzles, some seriousness to it. There are three branching storylines. So wits when Indy solves hard puzzles alone, fists when you beat up the Nazis, and like team the best one when you team up with Sophia Hapgood, which is basically the best chemistry and like interaction between adventure game characters probably ever. Again, this wanted the guys from the Dalek, they wanted to reuse this in Ponya. To some extent, they managed to do this. It's never as good as it was back then, but I really like Daedalic for what they did in the Ponya. So basically, some screens. You've got team version to the left when Indy explores Crete Island with Sophia. You've got Indy discussing alone, trying to use his wits to find some dig site alone, and then you have a fists in the labyrinth with some soldier. So basically, there are three branching storylines completely separately done. So you need to play this game for 3 times to see everything. And basically, there is one more thing that I need to add, that elements in this game are randomized, so there might be several ways of solving puzzles, and not all will be available for you when you play this game. So basically, it depends on your choices. So this game tends to surprise you. Again, other Lucasfilm games that are worth mentioning that should set up some things are Sam & Max Hit the Road, which is really hilarious also. Day of the Tentacle, legendary game, and Dig. So basically, the graphics becomes better and better. The interface becomes more icon-based and less. So these are still verbs, but more icons, less words. So basically, the characteristics of those Lucas games are the protagonist cannot die. They are very abstract, hilarious, and very silly sometimes, or very dark and sad as well. Depends on the game. Moon logical puzzles, so like this Monkey Wrench or Piranha Puzzles or whatnot. Light entertainment, no progress trackers, no points. Basically, the challenge is just completing the game. Often one unbranching storyline, but sometimes it happens when you have branching storylines. And basically, the order of actions either fixed or doable in sequence picked by players. So that's how the chapters proceed. So you need to do some sequence of things, and the sequence is based on player's decision, but you need to complete those things together to proceed to the next chapter. But Sierra doesn't stay behind, and they introduce a lot of games in a race towards the same goal and evolution of games with Lucasfilm games. So Laura Bow, the Dagger of Amon-Ra, so this detective girl, basically King's Quest. The interface was really similar to the Scam engine, so moon logic and unwinnable situations, characteristic face close-ups. This is a very important thing because they would use these frames, and character can die in those games. Before, in Lucasfilm games, your character could not die. In those games, your character can die, and basically they would die often. So saving is crucial. Save whenever you play the old Sierra games, you need to save all the time with every stage, because as I said, there are some unwinnable situations. There is a lot of backtracking if something bad happens. So basically that's it. Laura Bow, I need to show you this gruesome scene. This is very gruesome and bloody. But this is a misstep of the era. This is a murder scene from Laura Bow and the Dagger of Amon-Ra. And basically the guy gets killed by a porcupine. And basically, can you see the facial expression of this porcupine? This is a true horror. I don't know. I never knew if it's hilarious or so sad and so funny. So basically, you can expect the unexpected from those games. So basically, let's switch that side because I cannot look at this anymore. So basically, Sierra's games were designed to make players spend a lot of time with those games, with trial and retry. Therefore, some unwinnables are there. Some things like basically another thing that I needed to tell you is this moment when in King's Quest V there is a scene when you enter one of the locations, there is a rat running from the left to the right, and after this rat there is a cat chasing that rat, and you have exactly like 5 to 10 seconds to react and save that rat. If you don't save that rat, the cat kills the rat, and there is that. If that happens, that's a game over. But game doesn't say that it's a game over, because this rat is exactly needed in one situation later on when you need to ask this rat to like cut your wrists and not wrists, like bonds that you have on your wrists. And if the rat dies, you would constantly die in that prison scene. And as a player, you have no bloody idea what's happened. What should I do? And there's this assumption that if you explore the scene for a longer period of time, you'll find a solution. No. If that rat died in like 15 minutes of your playthrough, then it's not possible to beat that game. That's what I'm saying. So the sandwich that I mentioned, and then there is a first achievement system that I mentioned, which is basically that point system that would tell you that you need to complete something. So again, achievements are not a new thing, but there were progress trackers in Sierra's games, those points. And Sierra would create a lot of quest games, named Quest this and that. So, but before we'll get there, Gabriel Knight. Again, another remade game, absolutely amazing. I'm starting talking about with the biggest titles of the era. This is Jens Jensen plot. It's so smart, it's so good, so hilarious at times. The protagonists are really likable and memorable. There is a whole saga of games with Gabriel Knight and Grace Nakimura. As you can see to the left, there's an old version. To the right, you've got a remake, 20th anniversary. And basically both are pretty well done. Fun fact is that the old one has one annoying puzzle that is completely remade in the new one. So if you want to have a pleasant experience, play the newer than the older one. But again, a lot of storytelling, a lot of interesting things about New Orleans that you can learn. A lot of stuff basically that you would actually appreciate playing. Interface. Very quickly, I just wanted to show you that this scam system sort of interface is still kind of there, but it's not a scam system anymore. It's icon based, but you can see that there is a move, look, and these are represented by the icons. There is a question mark and exclamation mark, which is like speak and ask questions, use, open, operate, and push. And basically that's how it is. Item display, item inventory, point system as well. And then there are also elements characteristic to this game, like the bug and the tape recorder. Hero Quest, and because the Warhammer brand had the Hero Quest reserved for the game, board game, they would change the name to Quest for Glory. 4 games, very special in my heart, because these are not only amazing Adventure Sierra games, but also a mix of adventure game with an RPG. And basically the character in those games has a class. The hero has stats. There is a save import option, so when you beat the first game and you save the town of Spielberg, then you can import your character to the second game. In the second game, you can actually rebrand your class. You can become a paladin, which is not a choosable class in any of those games. But as a paladin, you can import your paladin to the third, fourth, and even fifth game, and basically do the whole playthrough as paladin. And basically, these storylines and plots are branched because of the class. So Wizard's playthrough is completely different than Thief's, for example. Wizard has some quests and some situations absolutely unavailable for Thief, and vice versa, and Fighter and so on. So basically, a really good thing, absolutely greatly made, very hard. Time is crucial element in this game, so several things happen in some specific times, so you need to be aware of the timing is very important in this game. But absolutely amazing, great climates, basically absolutely amazing depiction of Arabic world and Sahara like desert in the game, and in the second and third game. But let me just tune the sound a little down, maybe. I don't know how the music changed, and I don't know if it's loud or not. So basically, sorry about that. But again, in the fourth game, you've got absolutely magnificent Slavic climate, and basically, I always said that as a Polish guy, I really appreciate things like I've seen in The Witcher, because they remind me of my hometown, basically, and the surrounding areas. But in Quest for Glory 4, the sound of the valley and the blackbird chirping is basically exactly the way it should be. So that's a 90s game, and that's it. Westwood, known for strategy games, Command and Conquer, and things like that, created something called Legend of Kyrandia. Yeah, yeah, good point. So basically, Nemeczek is saying that Witcher is not Slavic, and that's true, because the mythology in The Witcher is not Slavic at all. Mostly it's Celtic and Germanic. There are some Slavic things, but Witcher Slavic parts are in the culture of NPCs, and in the, or at least in Velen and those Temeria and Redania places, musics, decorations, and actually a landscape. That's what I meant. So basically, Westwood, player could die in these games as well. Plotline is really interesting. In the first game, you have a Brandon that actually is a surviving prince, whose family was killed by an evil clown, Malcolm. You can see this guy to the right, and he's basically fighting Malcolm with magic. In the second game, you follow Xanthia. Xanthia is one of the NPCs from the first game. Brandon would get from some alchemic potions from her. But then you play as Xanthia in the second game, and I can tell you, the first one was really cool, neat, but the second Legend of Kyrandia 2 is absolutely amazing. If you haven't, and if you want something challenging and with a cool female protagonist with a lot of randomized puzzles, branching ways of and different ways of solving puzzles, a plethora of items, and a lot of situations that are really difficult to solve, then go for this one. It's absolutely amazing. You can find a talkie version, which is like a spoken dialogue with voiceover. So I loved that game. I played it in high school, and basically I've replayed it and replayed it. Absolutely amazing. The interface is very simple, so you could pick one of the items there on the shelf or in that box to the left that Brandon has, and then use it on the screen by just clicking the item on, for example, this octopus. Or you could use the item on that cauldron to the right to brew a concoction when you're Xantia. But let me tell you about the third game also. In the third game, you are the evil Malcolm. And that is a complete change of pace, a complete change of focus. So I love the fact that in the first game, Brandon is your good guy and Malcolm is your bad guy. But in the third game, you start learning that Malcolm's childhood was really, really bad. And that was because of Brandon's family. And your focus on how and what happened is completely different. So basically, those three form up a cool story with some absolutely great elements, some very hilarious content, yet sometimes very serious. And but I absolutely, yeah. Basically, some unwinnable situations. I was stuck several times in those games. I'll go through the list of other notable games. I need to mention those because I know that you guys are gamers. And I know that I shouldn't be telling you what to play. It's your choice what you're playing and based on what you want and what you like. But I need to at least go through some titles to maybe you don't know something from that list. So there was this French company called Delphine Software, and they created some amazing adventure games. Cruise for a Corpse, the game that had this cardboard circle as a copy protection, and Future Wars and Operation Stealth. I need to absolutely mention those because, as you can see, the Cruise for a Corpse is Agatha Christie style detective story placed on a cruising ship on the Mediterranean. It merges 2D with the 3D graphics with vectors, which is weird at times, but if you get used to this, it's really neat. And it's absolutely challenging detective story. Absolutely requiring discussions, dialogues, searching. So a really neat, top-notch Agatha Christie style story. I'm like, can't tell you how much interesting this was to play. Future Wars and Operation Stealth were other games. Basically, this screen I've chosen for Future Wars, which is a time travel adventure, very, very serious, with sci-fi elements. I've picked that screen because that screen was made by a young artist back then. The person that would become a very important name in game dev industry, Eric Chahi. If you played Another World game from the 90s, then that's the guy who created the Another World. This was amazing because back in the day, he created a reflection of a city based on how many colors is there? I think that 6 or 7, maybe 8 max. This is like a palette of colors. From the optimization point of view, it was really a neat work because this game used a different color palette for every scene. So when you switch scenes, the game would reload the color palette, making memory usage in games more optimized, and it wouldn't require you to address or create additional memory space for additional colors. So it would still use the static array of colors, but it would replace the color array, everything. Also Verb noun system. Then some dark imagery. So basically Darkseid and Harlan's Ellison, I Have No Moth and I Must Scream. So basically both based on somebody else's work. Darkseid is using H.R. Giger's graphics. So basically the guy who created Alien. So you can expect a really twisted shapes. The story is about a person who actually has a huge headache and he can't get sleep and he's like having visions. Basically it's a really alien-like story, so expect parasites and stuff. So basically really dark and heavy. Harlan's Ellison, I have no mouth and I must scream. If you read the short story by Harlan Ellison of the same title, you know how dark this one is. So the imagery I showed you, basically shows you that it's really, really dark. So you follow. If you don't know this story, so it's post-apocalyptic. I mean, there is only 6 people alive on the earth, and every one of those 6 persons is being a hostage with a prolonged life, kept by a supercomputer that actually killed whole humanity. And this supercomputer hates humanity so much that he basically makes those 6 people immortal and tortures them for all eternity. And this is like creepy, right? So your goal as a player is actually find a way to commit suicide, so to speak. Either you can somehow defeat the AI and switch it off, basically you'll die then, or somehow commit suicide, so the torture would stop. So basically this is a battle of brains against the AI. Absolutely horrifying, absolutely worth playing. Worth noting is the fact that M, so Allied Master Computer, Master Computer's voice is actually Harlan's Ellison voice. So the author of the short story actually had done a tremendous job of voicing M. Lure of the Temptress, where the virtual theater was introduced. When the NPCs actually would walk around the scene, they wouldn't be in the same places. They would walk, try to live their lives. It actually worked pretty well. It's also a game when you had some unwinnable situations. So to the left, there is this scene when you free Rat Pouch from the prison. Basically, in this very scene, you could kill Rat Pouch, and that would make this situation unwinnable because Rat Pouch is really important for the story. Basically, you can tell things to Rat Pouch, you can give him orders, and so on. There are some combat sequences in this game that were really nasty, but basically I like this game very, very much. It has a magnificent intro animation of the era, really legendary, so basically worth checking out. There's Microprose. As you know, Sid Meier and Microprose people were doing mostly strategy games, Pirate, Civilization, and so on. But they would also make some adventures. They used rotoscoping technique to record some neat animations of characters. So those sprite characters were really, the animation was really great. As you can see, the system is again very similar to the Scam system. Items, verbs, and that's it. So Dragon Sphere, Rexton World, Phantom of the Opera. Stories of those games were quite pleasant, but they are not very revolutionary. The only revolutionary thing about those games was basically animation. Then the mature content of more demanding players. So Sherlock Holmes stories and games started. So dark, dense, and very demanding logical puzzles. Interface, again, the same stuff, murder, mystery, and as you can see to the right, digitalization of real actors started. So I'll talk about this a little more in a moment. But then worth playing, very difficult games, I can tell you. Again, Lovecraftian horror. You know that I'm really into this stuff. So basically, Shadow of the Comet, which was a big inspiration for me, with keyboard-based movement. It's not a point-and-click; it's a proximity-based game. Basically, also annoying a little. And Alone in the Dark, as you know, was made by the same company, also with Lovecraftian theme, and Prisoner of Ice. So let me tell you this: if you're into Lovecraft, then it's a must play. And the story is really dense. As you can see, the graphics to the left are amazing. They create a creepy atmosphere. I wasn't so fond of the Prisoner of Ice as I was for about the Shadow of the Comet, but I strongly recommend to play both. Another thing, Dreamweb. Was a big scandal of the era because it featured the scene that I also depicted here, which is shooting the guy during a sex scene, which was basically very, very edgy and mature, which would be probably even today, even more probably. That was a scandal of the time, but I can tell you that this game shaken me so much, shaken me so very deeply. It's cyberpunkish. It's in the future, and basically, I don't want to spoil you too much with the plot of this game, but our protagonist has a serious mental problem, and basically, the player doesn't really know if it's a real thing or a mental problem. I will not tell you which it is because it's complicated, but it really, if you ever play this game, if you ever manage to convince yourself to the old type of graphics, and if you are really ready for being shaken at the end, so that's really worth mentioning. Top-down view, very very different thing. Uh, Companions of Xant and Shannara. So basically, if you're a Netflix fan, you've probably seen Shannara TV series with John Rhys Davies several years ago. Basically, that's the same world, and also Companions of Xant. So that game was based on Anthony Pierce's books. As you can see, this is another mix of RPG and adventure. You've got a party there, and there are some static images and screens, and you would use different characters' skills and items. Beautifully drawn backgrounds, first-person perspective, so to speak. Really cool blend, worth playing, especially Shannara, because Companions of Xant I wasn't so fond of, but Shannara was really cool. Cocktail Vision, this is probably something for a lecture about French companies and the French intake on games. But this is a very logical, like adventure game based on not only on using items, but also logically and very difficult puzzles based on multiple screens. So basically, to accomplish one thing, you would go to several screens basically and change the state of those screens to get back. So basically, really really complicated plots and really complicated mechanics. It's very similar graphic style, so basically all Goblins games were created, Goblins 1, 2 and 3 were created by the same visual artist, so one can tell. Absolutely magnificent. Again, if you're into puzzles and some brain work, like a logical stuff, more than dialogue, then it's a game for you. Cocktail Vision created a very similar game to the one I've shown before, which is first-person perspective game, but it's about the same. So you would solve complex non-speech-based puzzles in the scenes by using items and interacting with the screen. Really amazing mood and absolutely magical atmosphere. And in the 94, the absolutely magnum opus of the same graphic designer was Woodruff and the Schneebel of Azimuth. All the other games before shown were quite funny and hilarious. This one is sad. So basically, this one has a really sad plot, very philosophical one. So be warned that if you played Goblins, this is probably not the mood that you expect, but the graphic style is very similar. And this is probably the best game of all those by Cocktail Vision. KGB Cryo, another French company, created a mix of adventure game with a simulation and a very dark climate of the KGB Cold War, Iron Curtain, Cold War period. You're a KGB officer that actually tries to do an investigation. Absolutely difficult, challenging and very, very dark. So as you can see, our KGB officer would explore very dark subjects like the aspect of homosexuality in Soviet Russia, which is absolutely a problem till the very day, basically, and then acceptance and so on. So basically, this is a very dark game, and basically very difficult. I like failed like 4 times before I was able to complete this. I think I used a solution. The music that you hear in the background is from this game. This is Dune. This is one of my all-time favorite, not only because I'm a Dune fan, but also because this is an adventure game mixed with a strategy game. To some absolutely, this is basically a real-time strategy mixed with an adventure game. So you've got a real-time passage in this game. You need to command troops on the map, and you can command troops by meeting with them. And of course, you have a Dune plot in the background. Basically, this is a solitaire for me. I've played this. I can't tell you how many times I played this game and how many times I completed this. I started giving myself weird tasks, like I wouldn't finish a game without digging all the spice on the planet, or I wouldn't finish a game without making like growing trees on the whole planet or something like that. So basically I explored this. Yes, exactly that. Paul, I'm little introduce your father, which is a hilarious thing to say, but this is how the game introduced you to characters. Elvira, another adventure mixed with RPG elements. The horror based on the Elvira franchise. Elvira was, this is for Eastern European people, absolutely not known fact, but Cassandra Pearson was an actress that had this character in USA TV a show which was Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. She was very sexy and very provoking, so to speak, and very dark. She was basically a witch in this TV show. This was horror based and quite cool to watch, basically, not only because of the visuals but also because of some hilarious plot. And basically on this franchise those games were based. I can tell you, these games have amazingly creepy climate. This is even today. I feel a little bit uneasy playing those games because even though I expect things, the graphics are so well made and so convincingly horrifying that yeah, it's a cool thing. There was another thing. Like there were two Elvira games. Elvira 1, when you needed to free Elvira from the castle. Elvira 2, when you needed to explore the TV studio where Elvira shows are made. And there was a Waxworks, based on the movie Waxworks, which basically explored 4 Waxworks stages and sets. Yeah. That's exactly. And basically, a totally different genre. Yeah. Visual novels. The big, like we have now a big revolution, like coming back of the eroge in the West, right? So basically, back in the day, especially in this part of the world where people were not really speaking Japanese, I know that the USA was a market for eroge and hentai-based games. But not in Europe. But somehow I acquired some eroge games back in the 90s. And basically, I played those. I played a lot of those, and not only because of the lewd content, but because of the storyline. It's like this hilarious review on Steam saying, like, I came for the plot, but I stayed for the plot. So basically, that's basically for me. I'm showing you those games because those games have some amazing storyline. Season of Sakura, Three Sisters Story, Nocturnal Illusion, True Love, and Princess Maker 2. Yes, that's also the way of saying plot. So basically, some of those games have RPG elements, some planning, Princess Maker being the greatest example. This is the game I haven't played. cosmology of Kyoto, often mentioned by Guillermo del Toro, the director, and also the co-creator of the last game that he created with Hideo Kojima, as a very influence on him. Because I haven't played that game because I cannot acquire this anywhere. But this game is absolutely legendary. Every important game dev I have ever listened to said something that this game was a huge influence. This game has basically no end. It lets a player to experience the Heian-kyo period of Japanese history, which is like early medieval time, Dark Ages for the Western Europe, if you don't know what it is, what is the Heian period. But you would go around Kyoto and resolve situations. Your character can die in this game. But what happens when you die? When you die, you pick a new character and you can find the dead body of your previous character and pick the stuff and like continue the experience. This game has a lot of learning abilities and possibilities. It has a vocabulary, it has the encyclopedia embedded, and absolutely it follows the stories and magical legends and Oni stuff and things like that. I still need to play that. I need to tell you that this one exists. So basically the hardware factor starts kicking in. So basically the computers are becoming more powerful, acceleration and SVGA graphics, and the CD-ROM, which was known from the 80s for music, but for the data, they started using it in the 90s. So the summary of the chapter 2 is basically, quickly, I just want to go through this very quickly, that this is a golden era for adventures. You had a number of adventure games. The setup was made, the scene was set for any further developments. The games were experimenting, and basically they introduced a lot of elements that were like one-time shots, and basically, these games are sometimes one in a kind. And for unforgettable emotional experience require time investment a lot. No easy way out from those games. So, and then when the CD-ROM is introduced as a data medium, data drive, the FMV era starts. So full motion video, digitalization is being possible. A camera is content becomes digitized. Small budget games, I mean small budget games. Basically, those were very big budget games, but they cut costs basically by employing second-rated and cheap actors, which one can tell by playing those games. CD-ROM format allows a bigger content, extensive usage of blue and green screens, and small user interactions with it. So basically, these are interactive movies with some exceptions. But before this happens, there are some games that actually set up the stage and set up the content. So basically, this is Lovecraftian Daughter of the Serpents, which with visuals novel approach, decision-driven, and you've got some annoying stuff like pixel hunting. But the face-front presentation during dialogues, like, gets us closer to the era. This game had a huge replayability because you would pick your character class at the beginning of the game. And you could be a detective, occultist, and so on, and that would change things. So multiple replayability. Lovecraftian, a must-play for a Lovecraftian fan. Heart of China, as you can see, real actors are being used, but instead of a movie, it was a sequence of pictures. So the animation would be like people would be moving and NPCs would be moving, but they would be moving with a really limited animation. DOS format game, it wasn't. I think that it wasn't a CD-ROM based, it was still a floppy disk based. A very cool plot based in China, nice characters, a big hit of the era. But the real revolution started with the Seventh Quest. That was officially the first FMV game released on the CD-ROM. And basically it had some continuations. Even today there are some fan-made games based for like referring to this one game, to this game. This basically is a logical puzzle game. It's about solving logical puzzles rather than interaction. And after solving some logical puzzle, you would get a reward by a cutscene with actors. Resolution was really bad. The puzzles were really cleverly made, and the setting was a horror. Basically, the evil doll maker Henry Stauff had created a mansion in which he trapped souls of his visitors. Cool stuff. And with that game, smart puzzle games of the FMV era start. So basically, Myst, Zork Nemesis, Shivers, and the games like that. Really important factors are FPS like movie, like sequence movement, return to the text adventures, so direct player immersion. The thing that Shine a little bit later. But I think it's a little bit later. I need to explore that one. I might know this under some other title, or I might probably mixed it up with something else. But Myst, Zork Nemesis. What? Where were I? Okay. Text adventures. What I said about those 80s games. No worries. No worries, really. I really appreciate that. Return to the text adventures, direct player immersion, no immersion schema. So this is exactly the thing that you would get in those text adventures, but like the player is the protagonist thing. It's a return with some of those games. Very difficult and clever puzzles based on your location and interaction with your locations. Mood, graphics, and sound are the most important factors. So those games were really shining and really like hits visually and musically, and more freedom. Probably the illusion of freedom. So Myst, basically the logical, like the game that everyone would compare other similar games to. This is an adventure game because it has interactions, but they are more logical. So the lore that you learn from the world is based on your interactions with the world, observing the world, appreciating the world, rather than discussing with people. And using items is there, but it's not like open an inventory and use the item. It's like context based, and the game assumes that you did something before actually you use some item or switch some lever or something. Saga has many parts, so basically, yeah. Like very similar thing. Yeah. But the most favorite for me is probably Zork Nemesis. There was a Zork series of games, but this one had a really different mood. It was absolutely. Let me change the music basically to the music from the Zork because it's magnificent. Yeah, here it goes. Basically, music, visuals, everything is absolutely amazing in this game. Uh, some actors sections, but mostly interaction, exploration, very interesting lore, very dark secrets. Basically, a player, the protagonist is a player basically, and player finds themselves with the weird monastery, weird place, temple, when where there are four alchemists trapped in some undead state, and those alchemists, frozen in some glass coffins, would communicate with the player, telling them to actually free them. And basically, this is what the player usually does in those situations. They would follow the plot and suggestions, but then you start learning what are the motives. What's the nemesis there? There is a evil being called Nemesis. In that Nemesis is threatening player not to release those alchemists. Absolutely amazing, absolutely interesting plot. There is a lot of books in game, and you know that if a plot is interesting, then reading books in game is a thing to do, and that's what I did in this one. Amazing music, unforgettable, and great experience overall. Uh, Shivers. Again, puzzle based, not really item interaction. Plot was really simple. A teenage prank leaves a player closed in a museum that's supposed to be haunted by a previous owner of that museum that was never found, gone missing. Basically, it appears that the previous owner of the museum was killed by annoying Aztec spirits, and the player needs to explore the museum, solve puzzles, and trap those spirits. The problem is that the spirit location is randomized every playthrough, and every spirit has an essence towards it. So there is a spirit that loves brutal scenes, brutal scenery. So you can expect that the spirit will be somewhere in some exhibitions related to war or violence or something like that. But to catch a spirit, you need to have two parts of the vessel for the spirit, as you can see there at the bottom. Those are vessels. So to the left, the player has all the vessels acquired, I think. So basically, very interesting one, cool logic. Plot was not so good, but the experience was really worthy. There's a Polish game from the era, not really known, but it was really good in comparison to those missed games. Really greatly made. Called Ria, and this was more item based, as you can see at the bottom, but also had some cool puzzles, some actors playing some sequences, so the real FMV. Interesting plot: a city in the desert with some Persian kind of touch and feel. A really pleasant experience. Nothing really amazing as like Myst, but on a really high level quality. And then we've got the true FMVs like Phantasmagoria, which is like game with interesting plot, horror about demons and possessions. Both games actually. Really very creepy atmosphere, but cheesy, brutal scenes of torture. Basically cheesy acting, especially in the second part. Basically, the girl that you can see to the right. Yes, I've seen that one. I never played the X-Files games. I think there were two even, not one. But I know that, of course, they made an FMV with the actors and with David Duchovny and so on. But I haven't been playing that one. But the girl to the right was actually, I think she was a softcore erotic movies actor protagonist or something. So basically, they would employ actors from the cool. Basically cheesy plot, cheesy scenes, shocking things, and a lot of weird erotic content. But I can say about Phantasmagoria 2 that it was probably the first game ever that shown a gay person openly and had a gay content. So basically, this is like a cultural revolution going on there. Tex Murphy Adventures. Basically, I love those games. If you love Chandler's noir protagonist with a post-apocalyptic world, this is a post-apo. Don't make any mistakes. I know this guy looks like from the 40s, 1940s, but this is a post-apo in 2000, I think, 40 something. Basically, there is this whole series of those games. Some of those are not FMVs. Some of those are from the previous age. Other there is like a Martian Memorandum and Mean Streets, but which have the same protagonist. But the real fun starts with Under a Killing Moon, and then Pandora's Directive, and then there are some newer games made by Chris Jones, which is not only a protagonist but also a creator of this game. Absolutely memorable characters, absolutely difficult detective story, very cool portrayal of characters, good actors. Basically, this is a good way of playing things. Really interesting scenery. Another thing is that it's a merge of FPS game, because the exploration would be an FPS mode. You would walk around. Yes, Tesla effect is also the next part. Exactly. So basically, the Tesla effect was from 2014 or 13 or something like that. So basically, yeah, that's the next stage. Uh, but basically, like Tex Marcy is so hilarious, and he's a good detective basically, and really challenging plot. And if you like detective games, this is a must play. Um, Gabriel Knight. I've talked to you about Gabriel Knight before, showing that this is like a magnum opus of Jane Jensen and a very interesting story based in New Orleans. But basically, the second game of the cycle is an FMV. The FMV basically takes place in Bavaria, around Neuschwanstein, around things related to Ludwig II, around Wagner and basically Bayreuth, and those are basically locations of the game. I learned a lot about Bavaria from this game, and that's a hilarious thing, because that's an American game, in an American game with some content that you can learn about some cultural characteristics of Bavaria. So really cool thing. This is about werewolves as well. So if you're a Polish person, then you probably recognize the guy to the left, this dark-eyed person. This guy was actually a Polish actor. He was playing in Killer w Dwóch movie or something, one of those killers, if you remember those Polish movies from like 20 years ago. But basically, the year this game was released, he received an award, a game award, for being the meanest dark black character in games. So it's really, he plays very, very good. He's probably the best actor in this game, and he's very convincing. And the plot is about werewolves. I know that we've got World of Darkness fans online, so basically this is a very good story about werewolves. Absolutely top notch. You can get it on GOG as most of those things. So basically, another disgusting scene, but I need to talk to you about this. Bad Mojo, FMV, starts as an FMV, but this is a game when you become a cockroach. Intelligent, with human mind, human memories, but a cockroach in a very, very nasty environment. So I know that this scene when the rat is getting killed by some blades is nasty, but that's one of the ways you need actually to solve some puzzles. You need to actually manipulate some screws in the cupboard that has those things stored, and that then you need to kill that rat, because this rat would kill you instead. So absolutely horrendous, dirty place. Intelligence is your only weapon, and basically you don't have any inventory. You have some puzzles based on logic and intelligence. Absolutely amazing. I know I'm talking like too much. Amazing is there in my words, but absolutely must. If you're into dark stories about like Kafka style horror, or being trapped in a fragile body with your intelligence to solve puzzles, that's the thing. And then the FMV era comes to a close, which basically is Black Dahlia, that started finally employ some really good actors. You know Dennis Hopper from David Lynch's movies, like the Blue Velvet, for example, where he played a big bad guy. But the detective story about dark Nazi stuff, so basically on an Erbe Thule society, CIA connections with the Nazis, and explorations of mystics of Nordic cults and so on. Very good acting. Poor plot, but acting was very good, and sometimes it kept me on edge. So cool. So the sunset of the 90s was rise of action games and modern RPGs. Adventures started to go 3D. Small revenue from adventure games, more action-oriented stuff started happening. Franchise-oriented games are the new AAA, so basically Spider-Mans and Batmans and whatnot are the thing and way to earn money for some time now. It was before, but now it starts to bring real money to the table. The reading ratio. So basically, before, as you could see, the games were for readers. So basically, people would read a lot of text and correspond and act based on the text. Now, the reading ratio falls down. There is more TV-like entertainment, and that's visible in FMVs. More accessible games are needed. So like games are too difficult factors, and new generation starting playing video games in this very moment. So millennial factor is there. So basically there's a redefinition of the brand, and new needs arise. So another thing is about the soothing climate. There are some games that are not strictly adventures, but they need to be mentioned, which is the Neverhood, based on the Bible, basically philosophical plot. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, mood and art above all. Neverhood is a story about the clay person without name, without voice, based on the Bible. How complex can that be? And how difficult to understand? This game has a really annoying part, which is actually to complete that game, you need to go through 40 screens. Every screen has a text on the wall. You can read the whole text, read it. But basically, the very first time I played this game, I wasn't able to like spend like 3 hours just to go through all the screens. So I just decided to turn around, which wasn't a good idea, because at the end of those 40 screens there is an item you need to pick up. So basically that's the thing. But a Little Big Adventure, oh, let me tell you. If you ever yes, soundtrack in Neverhood is absolutely brilliant. What was the name of the musician? Uh, Terry. I don't remember. I need to remember, like, remind myself later on. But absolutely, he uses Dixieland and various Southern American styles of music to compose the music with some weird singing. Absolutely nice and great. But about Little Big Adventure, so two parts of the game. This is like arcade adventure, a lot of jumping and problem solving and puzzles and so on, but also a lot of dialogues and items. But I don't know if sometimes there is one has a need to play a game that's so soothing. You know that even if something evil is happening in the game, even if you have fighting or something, the whole climate of the game is absolutely calming. And this is the game. Little Big Adventure 2 is with everything, with art style, music, plot, exploration. I mean, the very first thing that your wife Zoe in the second game tells you to do is to heal your hurt dino fly. How cute is that? So basically, it starts with healing your pretty friendly dinosaur that you need, because he's your friend, not only your mount, but he's your friend. So you can expect this from the absolutely whole game, and from the start to the end, it becomes darker than that. But basically, absolutely amazing. And I don't really know what to tell about this game. I had a number of blog posts on my blog before about games about mental issues, and Sanitarium is probably the best, if not one of the best, with game that deals with that subject. So our protagonist is a guy with a bandaged head. He doesn't remember his name. Well, he remembers it that his name is Max after finishing prologue in the first chapter. He doesn't remember how he ended up in the mental asylum. He sees things, and those things are pretty disturbing. and it's on player to figure out what's actually happening. And I will not tell you anything else because this should be on your list. I seriously think that this one should be on your list if you haven't already played that game. It may be annoying because the control schema is different. You need to hold the mouse button to move and things like that. But I can promise you that if you play that game, there are some sections of it that you will never forget. Never. That's the best recommendation I can give, and absolutely one of the best games of the 90s when it comes to adventure games, basically psychological horror with throat-gripping moments in it. Ragnar Tonquist, a Norwegian developer that created the Longest Journey saga with Dreamfall and Dreamfall chapters, was there and created this Marvel of Marvels as well. But if you were into mix of the cyberpunk and futuristic science fiction game with fantasy elements in a complex and absolutely solid, neatly made world, then it is for you. I can tell you, like, I need to say several things. You have multiple protagonists. So in first two games, so in the Longest Journey in the Dreamfall, you play as April Ryan, but yeah, basically kinda, but it's isometric. So basically the display is different. But I can tell you that I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is much darker when it comes to visual imagery, gory or even, very unsettling. But Sanitarium is more of a psychological thing. So you see creepy things, but they are not creepy because for the sake of being creepy. They are creepy because you know that they are there to tell you something, and you try to read creepy things. How I think that's the best explanation. So you know that something's wrong with the adults in the chapter 1 of Sanitarium because you're in a town full of children. Where are the adults? You know that there is something creepy about those adults, and if you learn what happened to the adults, it definitely will be creepy. But you know that there is a reason for it. It's not there just to like shock you. So it's different. M in the I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream wants to torture our characters. In Sanitarium, you don't really know what's happening. Is it just in Max's head? What's that? So basically, two different games, but really similar in some ways. I just wanted to point two things in there. So April Ryan is protagonist in 1.5 of game, and then you've got Zoe Castillo in Dreamfall and Dreamfall chapters. Typo, doesn't matter. Really cool characters, absolutely amazing mix of modern science fiction stuff with fantasy. Doesn't the lady to the right, the one with the white hair, has something to do with the dragons. I don't want to spoil who she is. Doesn't she look a little like some other lady from the Dragon Base franchise, like the Fire and Ice stuff? This game was before actually Fire and Ice was written, so I can't happen to like have this impression that they would base Daenerys on her. So basically, that's my impression. There are dragons, as you can see to the right. April talks to the like spirit of the dragon. So basically, yeah. A very complex storyline, very complex plot. Don't make the fairy tale element fool you. This is a bad way. Like the fairy tales have those negative elements always. They are showing creepy stuff and telling creepy stories sometimes, like witches eating children, for example, Hansel and Gretel, and so on. And this is the way the fantasy is presented in those games, and it was keeping us fans for years
asking questions about who is Lady Alvane from the intro of The Longest Journey. At Oakhurst, we learned who the Lady Alvane was several years ago when the last chapter of Dreamfall Chapters was released. And that's like a very interesting thing. Another thing I must say, as a Polish person again, is that Ragnar and the team decided to recreate the final stage of the sci-fi element of the story in basically in Warsaw, which is like a Czech Polish district of megapolis, of Europolis, the megapolis of Europe. And I was amazed about the research they made because our protagonists use and speak English. There are Indian people in that district. There are African people in that district, and they are all using Polish slang. So Zoe would say to one of her friends, like she would meet her and hi Ziomal. She would say hi Ziomal, and Ziomal is Polish for body, but in slang. And basically, this set, like the climate it built around what happens in this particular district, it made it so believable. And I believe it's for everyone, not only for Polish. Yeah. Yes, yes, yes. Basically, Hindu, Scandinavian, a lot of stuff. But because of the location, they introduce a lot of those subtle elements that you might not necessarily discover when you're not Polish, for example. And that was like a neat thing to see. So nice stuff. Legendary game. You all know Blade Runner because that's a legendary movie. But what you might not know is that the Blade Runner game is equally important if you're into that story, because Blade Runner the game follows not the Deckard steps but McCoy's steps. McCoy is actually doing the same investigation as Deckard in the movies, but about some other replicants that was supposedly also flew into Earth from other worlds with the ones that Deckard is hunting. The funniest thing about this game is that all important things in this game are randomized when you start the game. So, who's a replicant is picked at random. Even McCoy, so your protagonist, can be a replicant, like it happened in the latest movie, right? So basically, but he might not be one. So every playthrough is with randomized variables. Can you see this guy to the right? The one with the red jacket that sits there next to the Chinese restaurant. So in one of my playthroughs, this guy was an evil person that cheated McCoy. On McCoy, he would steal something from him or was collaborating with replicants or something. In other playthrough, he was actually my best friend. He told me some things willingly that I needed to know. And that's absolutely refreshing. So again, question why those old games have something that those new games don't have? Because of those things. And that's it. So the last song of the LucasArts. So we're closing the 90s, and we're slowly, finally going till the end of this presentation, and it's taking a lot of time. But Full Throttle, The Dig, and Grim Fandango, and the Grim Fandango is the if Monkey Island and Indiana Jones and Sanitarium are on the top, Grim Fandango is also on the top. Definitely. So Grim Fandango is a philosophical story about afterlife, basically set up in a Mexico climate of calaveras and the Day of the Dead, Días de los Muertos, right? And puzzles, everything. The 3D masterpiece. It was remade lately. Again, if there was a list, what games should you play in what order from those to have the biggest pleasure and you don't have time for everything, then pick this one. If you're into some light-mooded things. So light-mooded, I mean, the subjects taken are quite serious and spoken about, especially philosophically. I mean, this is about the journey of a soul, but in a really hilarious Monkey Islandish way of things. Full Throttle, also exaggerated way of making a Harley Davidson gang person a protagonist. And the dig was very interesting because the dig was I've shown the dig before. It was about basically something's happened to the okay, switch the music. Sorry about that. Basically, I need to play some other stuff there. Okay, let's monkey on it. Basically, the dig was about astronauts exploring some place in the a weird asteroid that takes them to some another world. Really interesting, but not. There are better games than the dig, but then it was really nice graphics. And Toonstruck, as you can see, Christopher Lloyd, known from the Back to the Future, so he would play this crazy professor with animes like animated protagonists or animated characters in the world taken to the silly Looney Tunes like environment. And summary is that unbelievably good games these were. I still compare those new games to these multitude of technologies, approaches, and algorithms used, setting up the point-and-click standard that we have till the very day. Both controller philosophies are born, so controller direct method and point-and-click method. Emotional aspect of the games married with storytelling of a movie-like on a movie-like scale, which was also mentioned by Amy Hennig with one of their discussions with Tim Schafer. 2 years ago or 1 year ago, when she said that what we need from the game world today is actually something like a Netflix, but for gamers. The Netflix in which gamers that would have a controller could participate with their families the same way they would watch a TV show or series, but playing the game, the adventure game basically. So this movie-like scale is not finished yet. It started back then, it emphasized it back then, but we'll be seeing the return of it quite soon. At least if what she says is something that those companies want to invest in, then we'll definitely see something like that. And of course, pixel art, 3D, and FMV foundations were set. So the finale. What's next? So many game devs still create the games like in the 90s, myself included. Also, my sorry excuse of a game was basically because I played the Shadow of the Comet. I know I'm probably too harsh on myself, but and I shouldn't be. But basically, yeah, I'm one of those persons that are probably their most serious judges. And critics. So. There are still games that you can pick that are made these days. FMVs, you can play today's FMVs like Her Story, Telling Lies, Contradiction, or 13th Doll, which is based basically on a fun product for 7th Quest. Pixart games. There are some companies like Wadgetite Games, Rem Mikalski from Seven, which would create a lot of Pixar and cool 90s like looking games. Remakes and tribute games. There is a thing called Heroine Quest based on Quest for Glory. Absolutely amazing and really well made. And for a tribute, it stands on its own, really, on its own legs. But it's still a tribute game. Let's skip me. And basically, Pixar is still beautiful and perfect for indie game dev because you don't need that many resources or time spent to develop games. And basically content you should read or watch. So who am I to tell you this? But there are some YouTubers, streamers that would tell you a lot of nice things about those games. Pushing Up Roses, I consider her a queen of old adventure games. Cannot Be Tamed, so the lady to the left, is also playing a lot of old games and has really interesting streams. Ragnarok's like what can I say? He's got this series of his which is about forgotten gems, and the forgotten gems are really video essays, really well made, really worth seeing. If you're into adventure games, you should probably visit Adventure Gamer's site, where reviews are being made. And that book. So basically, that book is a must-have for a person that are into those games. You can learn a lot of stuff from that book, and not only about game dev, not only about art and people and struggles, but many other things as well. And also GDC conference postmortem, so game developer conferences have a nice postmortems with some lectures about how those games were made. So basically, we reached the last slide finally after 2.5 hours of this lecture. And the question is, do we really know why those games are better? If they are better? Well, they're not and they are. Because we still have games being evolved. We still have situations when we see new things in gaming and game dev, but what we're lacking these days is this specific touch to specific games. So the games are being made mostly as a part of a bigger production line, factory pipeline, so to speak, rather than had their own personal touch. That's my opinion on this. Except for those games that we mentioned before, that Melina mentioned before as well, those companies like Wadjet, Dedalic, and so on. That's a subject for another lecture, another discussion. If that one haven't bored you to tears, but the very last thing that I wanted to tell you is that you can find in those old games things that you'll not see in any new games. I mean, emotionally, when it comes to witty texts, witty speeches and discussions, logical puzzles, and this factor of surprise, so to speak. So, with that, I need to ask if there are some other questions. Yeah, Space Quest 1 as well. Yeah. Yeah. After companies now seem to expect from the player playing multiple games. Yeah. So the business is business. So that the adventure games in the 90s were stopped being made because of the business decisions, and action games started to appear. Adventure elements were pushed to those action games for good or for the bad. For example, mentioned Amy Hennig's Legacy of Kain series is something brilliant, which is an action-oriented game. But yeah. On those, they expected replayability. Exactly, they want us to play. Yeah, so they expected replayability on the others. That's true. And today, that's a very good point. That's a good summary. Excuse me. That basically they want to sell us more games today, and they want, if they have a great idea, they want to make this episodic. So they want to sell you episodic content, DLC content, rather than invest in a story that's closed and with multiple replayability. So, Nemeczek, this is absolutely crucial to start this game from the first part. Absolutely crucial. The first Monkey Island sets up the game and sets up who the Guybrush is, and so on. So definitely remake of the first game. Oh, really? Really nice of you, Melina. Yeah, so basically, thank you very much. Um, I just want to tell you one thing. The English is my secondary language. I have a lot of quirks, goofs while speaking. I hope that I haven't been dragging too long with my expressions and way I'm talking, and that you could understand what I'm basically saying. That's the most important thing. And if you enjoyed it, like, I could do more of those. Like, again, a guy who talks, that's me. And like, I'm no longer even angry at people telling me to shut up, because this is actually quite expected after some time. Yeah, I will. Thank you. Uh, Thank you very much. So basically, what I can tell you next, I have several things on my list there. French games are really interesting because the French games had some really weird touch to them that you cannot find anything anywhere else. German games, Melina knows this perfectly, are all also on the similar level. There were some companies in Germany, like Blue Byte, for example, that actually made some amazing titles. So basically, that's another thing. Gothic, yeah, Piranha Bytes. That's a title. Yeah, heavy cannons. Basically, RPG games of the 90s. RPG games, again, there was a situation when somebody on Facebook written something like, "Oh, Baldur's Gate 2 was so revolutionary because," and maybe I'm too old for all that stuff, but it wasn't revolutionary. In fact, the elements that Baldur's Gate 2 had were in previous games, and those games were equally good. The thing that Baldur's Gate did very well was actually this isometric, cool visual representation and really nice storyline with sound and graphics and everything. But it wasn't revolutionary. It was a milestone, but it wasn't the first. So this is basically what I'm saying. Deponia is definitely German. Daedalic Entertainment is a German company. I don't know where they're placed, but not in Berlin, I think. Düsseldorf? I don't remember. Sorry, but yeah, definitely the Daedalic Entertainment games deserve their own panel, definitely, because they are artistically very well made. There is this another possible subject, which is those psychological and mental problems in games, in adventure games. So we mentioned Sanitarium, we mentioned I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. But there are some games from Daedalic, especially Edna and Harvey and Edna and Harvey 2, Harvey's New Eyes, which are absolutely both pretty and horrifying. What a ride it was playing those games. So basically, Daedalic Entertainment has their own ways. So Blue Bytes again. Blue Byte, Rings of Medusa. Blue Byte had created one of the best RPG games I have ever played, which is Albion, and Albion is a sci-fi fantasy RPG mix with so amazing plot. I cannot help myself by comparing other stuff to that game often. So why will you make a video why the Ultima series is well considered so much better than the Mass Effect series? Well, yeah, I could. So basically, we are talking about two different areas here, because Ultima really is a standard, so to speak, of RPGs, and Ultima 7 and plot of all three games, because Ultima 7 was actually 3 games. It was not a one game, it was 3 games really. The way you could solve puzzle in Ultima 7 probably deserves speaking about this game in form and about this game as an adventure game really. Clever, absolutely clever discussions, plot, lore, storyline, everything about this game is clever. So in that form, Mass Effect is a sorry excuse because Mass Effect's plot is mostly very Star Trek-ish, so to speak. So simple in some cases, really enjoyable but simple. So yeah, in this case, really, it's worth speaking. It's worth speaking and doing comparison. Definitely, good idea. Mm, uh, yeah. So this there is a number of things. I'm a noob streamer. I haven't been planning this along. I haven't been planning this at all, really. But I was watching Jim Sterling. Thank you for Jim Sterling. Yeah, as he says often. Thank God for me, right? So thank God for him. Jim Sterling in one of his videos said that he was actually trying to be a blogger and he wanted to write stuff rather than doing video content. And but he recognized the fact that it takes him 5 hours to write some essay. And the same information he can convey in a video in 10 minutes. So that's the only reason. Yeah, I'm not too good. Like basically, I need to learn more. I need to improve on things. I would need to spend some time about this. But definitely, if you enjoy this, if you want to have some discussions about this, if you want to have some panels about this, I'll definitely do this. I'm a gamer. I love talking about games. Uh, there's so much more to it, to adventure games, to everything. So, thank you. 10 out of 10. So, again, this consider this subject, the subject of why those games of old are so good and why some games of of the new times are not even comparable to those old games, not closed. This is still open for discussion. This is still unsolved because there are pretty good points. So this Ultima versus Mass Effect thing. Again, Ultima is a better RPG. It is. It definitely is. Not only because of the mechanics, and not only because the Mass Effect is simplified. It is because of other things too. So an adventure game based dialogues and so on. So basically it's not closed yet. We'll probably get there in some time. Thank you very much. Thank you for a great assessment. I mean, it's humbling a lot because this is basically I'm trying to talk about something that you might not be completely into, but I know that you know, watching me, that I want you to be interested in this thing. Why? Because if you start playing those games, if you start looking into the subject some more, we'll have more to talk about. It probably is a little bit selfish of me to have more people to talk about those things to. So, yeah, sorry, guilty as charged. So basically, okay, now you're starting trolling with Miranda. Okay. So Garus and Tali. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Can you see my t-shirt now? Can you see what it is? This is basically Tali, Zora. So basically, yeah, little blurry because it's getting dark in here, and I haven't planned this. I haven't got the lighting for it. If I do this, what happens? No, it's not good at all. Uh, yeah, okay. Uh, so basically, okay. So what else? I think we should wrap it up for today. It was a long time for you. Thank you Yeah. Thank you for listening and tuning in. Uh, you know where to find me, basically, here and then on that group. Basically, yeah. Any other things that we should talk before we wrap it up? I know that I sound kind of like a scrum master in the development team right now, but yeah, that's. Thank you very much for listening. Then let's then wrap it up, and yeah, let's eat something, folks. And till the next time, thank you for tuning it in. Yeah, a little bit too long. Basically, Pinpinex was right that it's going to take so much time. But thank you very much. Thank you for sharing this with you, for the ability to share this with you. And till the next time, have a fun and safe Saturday evening. Yeah, on YouTube. I'll probably push this to YouTube. So, yeah. Thank you. Take care. See ya.